Yes, I can see Dr. Etuk. Hello, Dr. Etuk. Good evening. You are muted, sir. You are on mute. Yes, I think you are good now.
Yeah,
good evening.
Gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. We can hear you now.
Okay. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me just do a few adjustments and I'll be with you.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Brooks, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Etuk. Dr. Etuk is one of the oldest actors within the Nigerian digital economy. Africa, I know he has stayed in the US for some time. He was here long when we used to travel to access the internet. Dr. Etuk was already there, building, beginning from a cyber cafe, giving access to internet to young people in Nigeria. That was like 35 years ago. Dr. Etuk here is one of the oldest players. He knows almost everybody from government to all the active players on the continent. So, Dr. Brooks, meet Dr. Etuk.
It's very nice to meet you, Dr. Etuk.
Yeah, Dr. Brooks, it's a pleasure meeting with you. I understand you came to Nigeria. Unfortunately, I wasn't available for your book launch.
Yes.
Can you hear me, gentlemen?
Yes.
I understand. Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. And I completely understand that you were not available at that time. I've been to Nigeria 4 times in the last 2.5 years, and I expect to be in Nigeria at least twice a year for the rest of my life, if I don't live there at some point. So I'm sure we will find a time to meet and have some jollof.
Nigerian jollof rice.
Absolutely.
Nigerian jollof
Absolutely.
rice. That's correct.
I'll be glad to facilitate.
I'm told you like jollof rice. Someone told me you like jollof rice. You like Nigeria jollof rice a lot.
I do. I have even found Nigerian jollof rice places here in Atlanta where I live. So I am serious about it.
Okay, don't worry. Okay. When you come next, we'll host you. We'll give you all the jollof you want.
Yes, yeah, that's amazing. So let's go into the business of the day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you are joining us anywhere in the world, my name is Kelvin Teso-Jiraji. We'd like to begin by introducing what the AfriDES Podcast means. The AfriDES Podcast is a gateway into exploring the digital economy landscape in Africa through engaging discussions with policymakers, experts, angel investors, innovators, and of course, our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. So this is the maiden edition, and the theme for this edition is understanding the African digital economy landscape. So to go into discussion honestly, I would like to begin by giving out some fact sheets about the African digital economy. The digital economy in Africa is becoming significant, with its share of global GDP rising from 15.5%, in 2006 to an anticipated 25 in 2004 to an anticipated 25% in 2026. The digital economy will contribute 5.2% in 2025. Nigeria reported a contribution of 14.58% to its GDP in the first quarter of 2024. So with those fact sheets, I would like to take on Dr. Etuk. Dr. Etuk, you've been along for quite a long time. I would like to begin with you. You've been an active player within the digital economy landscape, both in Nigeria, across Africa. And then I think in your life, you've stayed a reasonable, considerable number of years. I could spend considerable number of years in the US. So what will you define, what is digital economy? And then, of course, how would you define the African digital economy landscape? Thank you. Please, you begin by giving a little introduction about yourself, and then you react to defining the African digital economy and the landscape. Thank you. So, Dr. Etuk, you have the floor. Okay. While you are trying to address some technical challenges, I would like to move over to Brooks. Brooks, speaking from the diaspora perspective, and as an investor who has been in the investment sector for quite a number of years, and someone who is passionate about Africa, what is the current investment landscape in Africa? And then what role did you think the African diaspora should play?
Well, thank you for that, Jiraji. I want to begin by just giving a little bit of background so that the audience will understand my perspective. So I am an American-born member of the Nigerian diaspora, and I have spent the last several years of my career architecting and leading a venture capital firm that invests in entrepreneurs of color here in the United States of America. And in the middle of that process of making investments and vetting companies, I have done a significant amount of research related to Africa because my long-term goal is to invest back on the continent and sort of more strategically and more laser focused on, the African population and the African diaspora, starting in Nigeria. Now, Africa is a continent of 1.2 billion people. So let's just set that out there. There's 1.2 billion people that live on the continent. In 2023, venture capital investment and venture capital debt for the continent of Africa was $4.5 billion. Now, that might sound like a large number to some of the listeners, but that $4.5 billion global, if you look at the global venture capital ecosystem, it's about $283 billion. So, the continent of Africa, 1.2 billion people, got 4.5 billion out of 283 billion. So it's actually a very small number, a very small percentage. In terms of African investment last year in 2023, West Africa led by region over, South Africa or East Africa or Northern Africa. And of the 4.5 billion, 1.9 billion of that, or just under 40%, I believe, was in 10 deals. They're called mega deals. So once you take those 10 deals out, now the number is 2.6 billion. Again, on a continent with 1.2 billion people, a large chunk of the Earth's population. The sectors that led that investment were finance, IT, climate, and artificial intelligence. And as you listen to those sectors, you probably hear several things that maybe you would anticipate would be part of investment capital going to the continent that are not on the list. I immediately think of agriculture. I think of solid mineral investments. from a technology perspective, or even just from a broader investment perspective, those investment categories do not climb to the top of the investment pool. And of that $4.5 billion, if you take that number in 2023, that's actually a significant decrease from the previous year, 2022. I think it's down, 2023 was down 33 to 34% from 2022. So, the African continent is large and growing, and the investments, at least from the venture side, are shrinking. It's a really weird correlated theory, formula. And here's the crux of the issue, in my opinion. Last year in 2023, of that 1/3 reduction we saw in venture capital and venture debt flowing to the continent, 1/2 of that decrease, 50%, was North American investors that decreased. And as I was reading the analysis of this, trying to figure this out, what the author who wrote this report said was that Western investors, and specifically North American investors, are extremely opportunistic. So they might jump on a deal or jump on a trend, but they're not necessarily taking a long view of the African continent. And I promise I'll wrap this up soon, Jiraji, because I know I'm probably taking longer than I need to, but I just want to throw a couple of other statistics out. So when you think about the African continent, Africa is about to experience massive growth over the next 25 years. So according to McKinsey, from the report entitled Reimagining Africa's Economic Growth, I believe the report was released last year. It may have been the year before, but over the next 25 years, China will lose a net population of 180 million. Europe will lose a net population of 156 million. So both of those regions, those nations are shrinking. North America will only grow by 39 million, which I consider fairly modest growth. Latin America will grow by 49 million, which is better than North America, but still modest growth. India will grow by 183 million people, and Africa, the African continent, will grow by 796 million people. There will be 800 million new Africans born between now and 2025. So for those 800 million folks that are going to be born, and for the Africans that currently live on the African continent, we've got to ask ourselves some very specific questions, such as, what type of world do we want those 800 million new people to live in? What type of opportunities do we want them to have from the time that they're born until we get to 2025? And what is our responsibility as an African group of folks, both domestically and globally? I'm part of the diaspora. What is our responsibility to increase investment on the continent? And my short answer is, I think we have every responsibility in the world. I feel that I have every responsibility in the world to increase investment, to help Africa achieve its goals that will be defined by African people that live on the African continent. And we've got to build a world where those 800 million people show up to an environment that is deeply concerned with their flourishing. So that's my thinking about investment right now, Jiraji. That's how I'm thinking about the future of investment. And I am building right now a network of investors that either are currently investing on the African continent or are in the very early stages of setting up investment vehicles for the African continent, because I'm extremely serious about this. I think you're on mute, Jiraji.
Yeah, awesome. I like that perspective. I like that introduction. So what do you think is the role of the diaspora? I know you've spoken a lot passionately about your contribution, but holistically, what's your call for diaspora participation in Africa's transformation?
So from my perspective, before we get to the doing part of it, we have to just really get together as a people and say we're unified in a shared vision for the future of the continent. The diaspora, we, the members of the diaspora, we feel as though we've got a lot to offer, but it would be inappropriate and ridiculous for us to just jump onto the continent and start doing a bunch of stuff. We've actually got to listen to and respect folks that have been on the continent for generations. On the other side of the conversation, there seems to be a fair amount of pushback often from folks on the African continent to diaspora interventions, which I completely understand, because, a lot of folks like myself in the diaspora, we think we know everything. We come over there and start doing stuff. And because we don't listen, we can screw stuff up. So I would love to see the formation of some extremely powerful African and African diaspora groups focused on specific sectors. I would love to be a part of one focused on the investment sector, the venture capital sector. And we've got to build those relationships that were lost across the transatlantic journey from Africa to the West and to the North. Once we get past that relational reconnection, I think we can rapidly accelerate a brand new African economy that can not only compete globally, but win globally.
Awesome. Amazing. Yeah, Dr. Etuk, are you back?
Yeah, I'm sorry about the network glitch. This is part of the Africa, the issues that we need to figure out with the Africa digital economy, how to keep our networks on in Africa.
Yeah, that's the best thing. Let me just follow you up on that. I would like you to define the digital economy and the digital economy landscape in Africa, and then possibly go further to explore what are the challenges and, of course, the opportunities as well.
Okay, well, let me start by telling us about my experience in ICT. The digital economy is more or less the future. It has to do with the future, but the future started from somewhere. It started from the past. It started many years ago. It started with the invention of the transistor. From there, the advent of the computer, the mainframe came first. Then the personal computer came, and then somewhere in 1990, I worked in a computer company. We were doing training, and like I was saying, it is the future, but it started from somewhere. It is still on a progressive movement upward. The digital economy started with the building blocks, which had to do with the early stages of computerization, getting companies to computerize, getting them to digitalize, and so on. And I want to share my own experience. I started 1990. I was a marketing manager in a company. And then in 1991, I decided to set up my own company. And what did we do? We needed to try to create awareness. We started by creating awareness to different organizations, to private firms, to anyone that would listen to us. We were trying to create awareness. Why did they need to computerize? We started with software development. In those days, by the time you do IT, you own a computer, you now had to write an application. So we had to start with Pascal Basic Fortran to be able to get our applications. There was nothing like applications in those days. So if you needed to get something done, then you needed to write an application, or you needed to buy one that was available at the time. So from IT development, from software development, we went into hardware, we went into networks, we went into infrastructure, we went into cloud. Now we've reached the stage of artificial intelligence. Now, what this has done from 30 years before now, all it has been doing is to lay the foundation, the requisite framework for the digital economy that we find ourselves now. So when we're talking about digital economy, it's not a thing of the future, though it is the future of the world, but it is not a thing of the future. It started from somewhere, and there are many people in different continents that were responsible for this. In the US, we had Bill Gates, we had Steve Jobs, and then in other countries, each company and each individual contributed to where we are right now, which is 2024. Now, coming to Africa now, the same model will have to apply. If we want to build a digital economy, we have to first and foremost define what is really the digital economy for Africa. We know what it is for the rest of the world, but how is it in Africa? Because we have inherent problems that we need to address, which will, which if we don't address it sufficiently, it is going to affect us negatively. We will not achieve the milestones that have been set by the United Nations, by the World Bank, by African Union, etc., etc. Africa has 54 nations. We have a population of 1.5 million inhabitants in Africa. And the unfortunate thing is that we only have 570 million users of internet in 2024. But it should appreciate to 800 million, maybe the next 5 to 10 years. But right now we only have that a low teledensity, which is not commensurate with the goals that we have set to achieve the milestones of the economy. That's the digital economy that we are looking at. So the World Bank has also stated that of the populations we have in the developing countries in Africa, that we only have that there are about 65% of the inhabitants that don't even have access to internet, they don't have access to phones, and they don't have access to anything, any form of connectivity in any form, fashion, and manner. So we have to understand the prevalent problems, the problems of policy, the problems of education, the problems of trying to grow the digital economy of Africa. So there are many more things I can say, but I'll just allow you to continue, and maybe you have one or two questions to ask before we continue.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Etuk. And I like the fact that you've already stated how far we've come in terms of involvement of the internet. So, Dr. Brooks, I know you've been very passionate about Africa, the continent. You know, you recently published a book, Omowole. I would like you to just touch on what was the inspiration? What is the inspiration?
So to get right to it, the inspiration for the book is that I took an ancestry test that told me that my Jamaican mother is of Nigerian ancestry, which led to me becoming, at least in my mind, I was already this, but in my mind now, a member of the Nigerian diaspora. And the book is a sort of like an autobiography, but the goal of the book is really to shine a light on the fact that we've got some catching up to do to make sure that the continent of Africa and the nation of Nigeria are competitive moving forward. And as I think about the digital economy of the future, I by the way, Dr. Etuk's statistics and comments were fantastic. We've just got these massive gaps in post-colonial societies. And on the continent, there's been centuries of extraction of value with very little addition of value from outside. I'm beginning to think that probably most of the solutions for the African continent exist on the African continent and within the African diaspora. Will we need to, in the initial stage, borrow some technologies that are being developed globally if they make sense on the African continent? Yes, we will. But I want to see solutions architected that are African. I want to see problems solved for Africans by Africans. In America, there's a company called FUBU, for us, by us. I'm looking for FUBU African solutions. And I am most interested in investing in African entrepreneurs who are deeply concerned about the future of the African continent. Because I believe, and I've said this multiple times, I say it pretty much everywhere I go now, based on the population growth, based on the spending power, the intellectual capabilities of African people worldwide, we are entering what I am calling the African era of human history. Europe is shrinking, China's shrinking. There's modest growth everywhere else except for India, and Africa grows by 800 million people over the next 25 years. We're entering the African era of human history. And so it just makes sense to me that instead of relying on the rest of the world to develop solutions and then try to make them fit in Africa. We should develop Afrocentric, African developed solutions that, because they were developed in Africa, will be an immediate fit. There is no contextualization necessary. They're ready, plug and play today. So I expect over the next several years of my life, couple decades of my life, to invest heavily in African ideas for and by African people that will accelerate on the African continent and close the digital gaps and the other gaps that exist. So that's why I wrote my book, Omowale. That name is part of a larger name, Adamu Omowale Chibuzor. And that has become my new identity in almost every way. I am an Afrocentric, Pan-African, Afrofuturist.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooks. Dr. Etuk, I would like to take you up on part of information Brooks shared, in the involvement of the internet beginning from Web 1 to Web 3, and then looking at Africans' participation, even particularly from the innovation standpoint. I know when you began, you were calling Steve Jobs, How do we have, what's the future outlook like, particularly from the innovation standpoint of having the Steve Jobs, the African Steve Jobs of the future? How do you speak at the outlook,
Please come again. I'm having a network connectivity, so facing it now. Please.
Okay, now from the involvement of the internet, beginning from Web 1 to Web 3, Africa have played catch up. Basically, let me just put it out. Africa have been playing catch up. So what does the future look in terms of innovation, in terms of smart investment? Because what has happened in the past 30 years is most of the projects in Africa doing well are funded abroad. As a matter of fact, African projects are being listed in New York Stock Exchange and the likes, So what does the future looks like in having African projects listed, funded in Africa, either by the Africans themselves or the African diaspora, and then having projects listed in African Stock Exchange and all that, what does the future look like?
Okay, from my own personal assessment, and this is my basic personal assessment, it could be bright, but you see, we still have a whole lot of issues, inherent issues in policy. We have issues in governance. We have issues in adaptability. We have issues of let me just put it in summary. We just have issues of corruption. Corruption is the main thing that is hindering us from getting to where we should. It has been the growth of IT, the growth of innovation has been a private sector driven thing. It is when the innovators, the founders, and the investors see a need, they come in to fill that need. And what we've been doing, like you rightly said, is that we've been doing nothing but catch up. But, if we can remove certain stumbling blocks, government is supposed to be the main catalyst. If we have people like Dr. Brooks who have said they want to come in and invest in Africa, then we have to start with capacity building to let people understand. Yeah, we have the fintechs, we have the mobile companies and so on and so forth. But that is not just what the digital economy is all about. It has to do with proper healthcare. It has to do with having efficient energy systems that save, let's say, that are clean, that saves the citizens money. Right now, all across Africa, fuel prices are very high. Cost of living is very high. So all we need is for government, who is a catalyst, and a few of these companies and a few investors who will come in massively to Africa to invest so that we can achieve the set milestones. If we don't do that, then we're not going to achieve those milestones. the outlook is good, is excellent. Africa has a population of 1.5 million, 1.5 billion inhabitants. And the good thing about Africa is that most of its population are youths. So the outlook is excellent, it's good. But there are issues of capacity building and infrastructural issues that we need to address. It's quite excellent.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a document that aligns to that. I'd like to share that. I was going through the African Union Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, 2020 to 2030, and there is an assertion that caught my attention. There was an assertion in that document that states that Africa presents a sea of economic opportunities in virtually every sector. And then the youthful population structure is an enormous opportunity in the digital area. So do you agree to this assertion, Dr. Etuk?
Yes, yeah, I totally agree.
Do you agree to the fact that
I totally agree with it?
Can you speak more to that as to why every sector within the African economy presents very huge economy, and why are the youthful population also a resource for leapfrogging Africa or accelerating the development on the continent?
Sorry, I lost you at a particular point. I don't know what's wrong with my network. I heard part of what you were saying. I just wanted
to elaborate on that assertion, on the fact that every sector of the economy is an opportunity. And of course, the youthful population are a very huge resource for accelerating development. Can you just go a bit deeper and why the assertion?
Okay, you see, like I was trying to explain, you see, it is most development, most innovation is more or less a private sector driven. And then government now tags along to say, okay, fine, what can we do to help you to improve what you are trying to deliver to society? So once that happens, when governments gets on the platform, government now tends to, sorry, I'm having some issues here, sorry. So government now tends to try to put infrastructures in place to help the private sector to develop and to grow. And when they do that, that goes a long way to helping in what you're talking about. Now, for instance, most governments have been slow in embracing e-government. Most governments are still analog. Most things you do, everywhere you go to, you have to fill forms. In most places, you still have to fill forms. What is going to help us to achieve the digital economy and to get youth participation is when the government puts in infrastructure that will help to digitalize more. Let's say, let's have more, less paperwork, but more digital platforms. Many countries don't have their own data banks. They don't have data centers. We are trying to put data centers in place in various places in Nigeria, but it's still not enough to meet with the demands that we are having. Once we're able to do that, and then we are able to train the teeming youths that we have on the aspect of the digital economy, once we're able to put the tools in their hands, then there'll be more creativity and more innovation. The other thing we need to do is to plant more innovation incubation centers. We are trying, but we don't have enough. The digital economy is massive. It's really massive, but we are really, really lagging behind. But once we can have enough infrastructure or adequate infrastructure in place, once we're able to have the right drive from the different governments, then we should be able to do better. I want to use Estonia as an example. Estonia decided to computerize. What did they do? They did a ground up thing. They computerized from the ground up. They make sure that everyone had a digital identity. Every business had a digital identity. In Estonia, they don't do the kind of election that they do in other countries. Most people vote digitally. You don't need to go to a polling station to vote. They do it digitally. Everything in Estonia has been all-encompassing, bringing the whole of society into a digital platform so that there is collaboration, there is innovation, there's growth, there's interaction with government, there is all the possibilities. So I would always use Estonia as an example of how the African continent should develop along those lines.
Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Brooks. Do you agree to the fact that every sector within the African digital economy presents a very huge opportunity, and how youths are a resource to accelerating development on the continent? Can you share more about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and let me just reiterate. I come from the perspective of an investor. That was my entrance onto the continent and how I understand. That's how I make sense out of what's going on. Let's just take AI as an example. Worldwide right now, there are approximately 70,000 AI companies. And AI is something that is going to be part of every human society very soon, if it's not already in some small way part of every human society. There's a lot being written right now on the bias that's embedded within AI, because if you're a coder who codes AI, who has your own biases, and you're building those biases into the AI, then those biases make their way across the AI. And so this is one of the reasons why we need Afrocentric solutions. I do believe that African youth and young adults are critical at this moment in human history and African continental history, because some of these technologies are advancing so rapidly that if we don't jump in the game and jump in the game at scale very soon, the opportunity will have passed us by. And then we'll be living with the results of other people's ideas being implemented poorly in our environments. I get back to, though, my original thinking. What does it take in whatever sector, energy sector, fintech sector, AI? I'm personally extremely interested in digital mining technologies. I mean, if you're going to pursue those sectors, what does it take? It takes investment capital. And I think this is one of the big unanswered questions right now globally. If investment capital from the United States and from European nations is significantly decreasing on the African continent, if many of the other regional investors that are coming to the continent from outside of the continent come with significant interests, and many of those interests are in acquiring and owning African property, right? Owning the rights to the mining industry, owning the rights to the agriculture, taking over the trade zones. I just read an article yesterday about, a Chinese company that is embattled with Nigeria about a trade zone, and they just basically took captive the Nigerian presidential jet. It's in Business Day Nigeria yesterday. You have all these foreign entities that are coming in and they're bringing their interests, and their interests are not first and foremost the flourishing of the African people. Their interests are first and foremost extracting value from the continent and bringing it back to their own homelands. We do need to activate African youth. We do need to activate African young adults. There's an extremely important role that even the wisdom generation of Africa has to play right now, ensuring that as we move forward, we don't get locked into a bunch of terrible deals with the IMF and the World Bank, which has historically been really problematic economically for the continent. But I think what's most critical from my seat, from my perspective, is we've got to solve this investment problem. And part of the solution is we've got to get African private sector leaders and African governments to put in the foundational investment capital that can be leveraged to draw additional investment capital, but it's Africa first, everybody else second. Right now, the way that it works for the most part is it's everybody else first and then Africa second. And anybody who's the first capital in always realizes the best capital gains. The return on investment is always better if you're an early investor than a later stage investor. Some of the largest companies like Google, if you just were one of the first 24 people that made an investment in that company, your net worth is in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So there's great innovation right now on the African continent. There's brilliance that's being activated into digital ideas, into digital companies. And we've got to get the ownership and the investment of those things into African hands so that African economies absorb the majority of those gains, which then leads to a different economic future for the continent. And what I also have a lot of questions. I am by no means a subject matter expert. I'm researching this right now. I'm in a doctoral program focused on the Nigerian economy. I'm in learning mode. But even what I've seen in my early research would suggest that if the resources of the African continent could be made fungible in a way that would capture the value for the African people, the citizenry, not just the elites, but the citizenry, we could have a completely different Africa by 2050. And those 800 million new Africans that will be born by that time would enter into a society where they would have every opportunity in the world. But it starts now. And this is why I think this conversation is so hypercritical right now. We've got, let me just give you another perspective on this conversation about the youth. Please don't get mad at me. Oftentimes in societies, I know this is true in American society, people like to talk about the youth because it gets them off the hook for the current generations, right? In some ways, talking about the youth is a way to kick the can instead of saying, but we've got, elderly people right now that we need to take care of. We've got adults right now that are unemployed that need to be taken care of. So this language of the youth, while on one side it brings hope for the future, on the other side, it's a way to just completely ignore the current needs of the existing generations. So I think we need to take an intergenerational approach to this conversation, not talk just about the youth. 1/3 of the world's youth will live on the African continent by 2050. We've got to talk about that. We've got to plan for that. But in the process, we can't throw away all the African elders that are currently struggling to feed their families day to day right now. It's both and, not either or.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yes, what's next, Dr. Etuk? What are you what's your next project? What with the focus in Africa? Can you share with us your next project, Dr. Etuk?
Okay, I mentioned when I started business in 1990, what we were doing was capacity building. What Dr. Brooks has said is very apt, is very true, that Africa must develop its own potential, must develop their own economy by themselves. We can't allow others to come in and do it for us. So what I had in mind, and we are setting out some blueprints, is that we have been exploring AI, we have been exploring blockchain, we've been exploring geospatial information systems, because for most of these African nations, they don't have what is known as a spatial data infrastructure. They don't have that. That is the key, one of the keys to getting them to be at par with the rest of the world. Most African nations don't have a special data infrastructure. So we're looking at setting out data centers. We've been in talks with HP and Microsoft and Google on that. We are also looking at how to build capacity. When we put the infrastructure in place, we then have to build capacity. Without capacity building, we won't get there. You can have as much investors as you like, but to do catch up, to be able to bridge the digital divide, we have to really intensify the amount of capacity building for the youth as possible. If we don't do that, then we may bring in all the money from the rest of the world, and yet we will not really achieve the milestones that we are looking at. So it's very important. Business incubation centers is what we have a focus on, data centers, and more training and more training.
Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Brooks. Can you share your next project, particularly with focus for Africa?
I can. I can share some of it, but some of it is I still am not at liberty to share. But I will tell you that. So I recently exited the firm that I helped co-found, the investment firm that I helped co-found, and have been co-leading for the last 6 years. And I'm in the early stages of building a brand new fund that will invest only on the African continent and in the African diaspora globally. Because from my perspective, I've just got we got to get some cash into the system. Even to build all of the beautiful things that Dr. Etuk just said, we've got to get some cash into the system, and we've got to get that money in the hands of indigenous African leaders who we can trust to take things forward at an accelerated pace. And so that is what I'm focused on right now, is taking, through the fund that we're forming, a fairly significant amount of investment capital and properly stewarding and managing that investment capital to bring a great return. And then, once you're successful in your first fund, that gives you the resources to then rinse and repeat. So I would imagine that over the next couple of decades, I will personally be able to deploy billions of dollars into the African ecosystems.
Amazing. If you are just joining us, this is AfriDES Podcast, a podcast exploring the digital economy landscape on the continent of Africa. And we've been speaking with Dr. Etuk Uduak and Dr. Chris Brooks. We're almost coming to the end of the podcast. If you have questions, please, you just kindly drop them on the chat box for both of the panelists to take on. But before closing, I would like to get your closing thoughts around understanding the digital economy landscape on the continent. Dr. Etuk, what are your closing thoughts?
Well, my closing thoughts is that we should engage in more collaboration with the African Union and get them to equally collaborate with the different states in Africa, so that the blueprint that they have in place could be fully optimized. It's very important that we look for ways to accelerate that those business models and make it successful.
Yeah, apt. Yeah, that's apt. Over to you, Chris Brooks. What are your closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are really that I believe that almost everything Africa needs, Africa already has. I think the great work that needs to be done, at least over the next few years, is to just connect the dots, to build connective tissue among all of the African leaders and African organizations that are doing very good work, and to get them to work interdependently. I love the word collaboration. It's a good word. I prefer the word interdependence. In an interdependent model, I can't succeed without you and you can't succeed without me. And I think that's the nature of what needs to happen next. We need to build interdependent models where none of us is willing to see anybody fail, and we all work together to help each other succeed. Will some businesses fail? Yes, they will. Will some investments not provide a return on investment? That's true. Will some governments be better actors than other governments? We already know that's true. But generally speaking, we just have to believe that our fates are all tied together and that the African continent will rise or fall together. And so I love the thought and the language of the African Union. I think it's a powerful concept. I think it's a powerful body. And I believe that the spirit that they bring to the conversation is exactly how we need to proceed.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Brooks and Dr. Etuk, for sharing. This postcard leads to the African Digital Economy Summit, and then we are harvesting these conversations to form a compendium for both the African Union and the global leadership around tech, to have deliberations and, of course, roadmaps and frameworks to advancing the Africa, or achieving the Africa we want. So with your closing, as we prepare towards the African Digital Economy Summit, we would like to leverage this opportunity to call on all the relevant stakeholders to come and join forces with us through the African Digital Economy Summit. Let's look at how we can leverage one another, as Brooks put it, an interdependence model where we can support each other, hold each other's hands, of course, invest in one another, and truly build a strong, interdependent global economy, as Dr. Brooks would like to put it, So we'd like to end here, but before we end, we'd like to continue with the call to galvanizing support towards our summit. So if any one of you wants to share about the need for having a summit to all, basically having engagement of advancing the digital economy on the continent, looking at the various sectors, particularly smart investment and understanding risk mitigation strategy, because Africa is peculiar, Africa is unique. Africa has what I call the rural Africa, which is, for me, is the next wave of prosperity on the continent. So I would like to yield to any of you to add your voice to that call for the need for an African Digital Economy Summit. Thank you. So Dr. Etuk, you want to lead, or Dr. Brooks, you?
I would love for Dr. Well, okay, I'll go.
Okay, Dr. Etuk?
Yes.
Okay, if I got you right, your question is the need for us to synergize towards the African Summit coming up in October, right?
No, yeah, basically the need for us to synergize and come together to have a robust conversations towards advancing the African digital economy, and then of course the African Union Agenda 2063, which places digital economy or digital transformation at the heart of accelerating the achievement of that.
Yeah, I think what we should do, I don't know whether there's a local organizing committee that should be set up first and foremost, and then responsibility should be assigned. They'll be given targets as to what they are to do and who they are to meet, and so on. Apart from what we're doing now, which is essential, we should fix a time, maybe a permanent time that we will be meeting every week to follow up on the achievements and the milestones that we will set in achieving that. I think we should, like I said, we should collaborate more, and we should collaborate with the different governments. We have 54 nations. I don't know whether we have representation in the 54 nations, whether they've been contacted. Then I do remember something that we discussed. We talked about awarding those who, or recognizing those who have played significant roles in the process of the African, building the African economy. I think everything should just be about the collaboration, continuous collaboration and meetings.
Yeah, thank you. Brooks?
So I affirm everything that Dr. Etuk said. My one addition to that would be, I think we should provide some case studies. I think we should try to figure out, of the unicorns on the continent, which I have researched, many of them come from, 2 or 3 nations. It would be interesting to know what factors have allowed those companies to grow and become so large, and which parts of those processes are replicable. Because if there are parts of those processes that are replicable that could easily be, transported or exported to other African nations, therefore increasing the probability of African unicorn companies coming out of all of those other nations, again, that just creates the broader base and the broader foundation for an African continental economy, which we're going to have to get there one way or another. We've got to get to an African continental economy that is strong. And the reason I really appreciate Dr. Etuk's comments is because all of the focus from the world when it comes to at least the venture capital industry is usually on just a couple of nations, right? Maybe 3 or 4. But there's brilliance and innovation in every African nation. And so we just have to figure out, how do we empower the entrepreneurs and the leaders and the innovators in those societies, those nations, to rise up with everybody else. And I am very excited about the conference and about the learning journey part of it, because if we can accelerate our learning together, we can do some fairly remarkable things, in my opinion, in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an amazing time with Dr. Uduak Etuk and Dr. Chris Brooks. With that, we've come to the end of the maiden edition of the AfriDES Podcast. Thank you all the participants for joining, and those who will be eventually rewatching the podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.